Saint Peter also, who was a Jew from, I believe, from Galilee, he was a fisherman, and he was a recruit by Jesus directly with his brothers uh, and and others that were his, I'm assuming, companionships in the industry. But Saint Peter wrote some things down for his fellow countrymen, because he was a minister to his fellow Jews, fellow countrymen. And St. Paul was too initially, until he was commissioned by God to go directly to the Gentiles. But St. Peter was to be a minister to the circumcision, which were those Orthodox believers and citizens of ancient Israel. And he told them that their traditions and all that stuff that they used to adhere to and practice, and that they were still living by, were traditions that were aimless, that were really meaningless, and had no bearing on what true relationship with God was. And because the new covenant had been established, that was spoken of by Moses, someone that they claimed to have respect for, and his laws, but Jesus pointed out, even his disciples, that they weren't abiding even by Mosaic tradition or customs and law and regulations, that they were twisting it and perverting it, making up all kinds of other stuff to go with it because of their bizarre and weird interpretations. And some of these interpretations are written down in the Mishnah and the Talmud. And I've read through some of it, and it is kind of bizarre, kind of strange that some of the things they come up with. And what I gathered from it, reading parts of the Talmud, was they weren't really dogmatic. They were just quoting other rabbis and giving their opinions about what they might have meant. But they certainly didn't seem authoritarian in their conclusions. But it was almost like the Quran, parts of the Quran where it's just a bunch of dictates, and it's not really a narrative of history, like the Bible, when you read through the Old Testament, it's actually a historical narrative, but it's more like just it doesn't describe battles or events. It just kind of lays down some rules and legislation and things like that, but doesn't really show the application of it, like the story of the Bible. So very interesting. St. Peter said that there was a covering the Apostle Paul said that there was a covering over their eyes, that they couldn't really see the truth until that veil, the covering, was lifted. And he said the only way that they could have a true interpretation of the scriptures was to have that veil removed. He says that they were spiritually blinded because of the devil, and because of just being not privy to the spiritual awakening. They had to be spiritually awoken to see Christ in the Old Testament. because Christ said, behold, in the volume of the book, it's written about him. Jesus can be seen in the Torah and the prophets and the writings, and that if that veil was removed, they'd be able to see it. So it's a spiritual awakening where they could have a true interpretation of the scriptures. And that's pretty much what Jesus was saying to the Sadducees and the Pharisees. He said at one point directly, he said, "You error, not knowing the scriptures." They erred. They were well studied. They were students of the Torah. But apparently Jesus believed that they didn't have the correct interpretation of Moses' writings or the prophets. So very interesting what St. Peter brought out concerning from their aimless traditions, that they developed over the years. A lot of it came from ancient Babylon, because they were without their temple for 70 years under the Nebuchadnezzar and other Belshazzar and other successive emperors of that time. And so they came up with, they had to basically, in order to keep their religion alive, they had to try to relate to their environment, because they no longer were in Jerusalem. They no longer were sovereign. They no longer was a sovereign nation. Other nations had control over how they lived and how they practiced. So they had to accommodate for that. So some of it's explainable under those conditions, because they had to adapt to a new environment, a foreign environment, which wasn't their own, the ones that they were acquainted with. And of course, the new generations that had risen up, they had to interpret what their fathers had left for them. The writings and their traditions, and how to interact with other Babylonians and other Greeks and other pagans, and how to live amongst them but not to be of them, as the scriptures say. Be in the world but not of the world. So the Jews had to live with people who didn't share their same views, and they had to get along with them to be good citizens of Babylon. So they weren't allowed to practice their religion.